Students, this is Mr. Boyd. Welcome back. So in this lesson, we're going to take a look at solving quadratic equations using square roots. Okay? So before we dive into actually solving some quadratics, let's review what is a square root. So a square root is the number that, when multiplied by itself twice, equals the number under the radical symbol. Now here's a question for you. Is there more than one answer to each of these problems? So you guys probably know right off the bat that the square root of 25 is 5. But my question is there another answer to that problem? Well, there actually is. The second answer is negative 5. Okay? Because 5 times 5 equals 25, so there's our first root. And the second root is negative 5 times negative 5 is also positive 25. So every square root, with the exception of the square root of 0, every square root has two possible answers to it. So the square root of 289 would be, I'm going to grab my calculator for that one because I don't know that one right off the top of my head. So let's see, if I'm going to do this on a calculator, I'm going to put in 289. And then I'm going to hit my square root button here, and I see that that is 17. So the answer to this would be negative 17 or positive 17. Now, a short, quick way to write that, new notation for you guys, is to write down a plus over a minus sign and the number 17. So this is actually plus or minus 17, positive 17 or negative 17. Okay? All right, the square root of 625. Well, I actually know that one off the top of my head. Well, let's go ahead and plug it in and practice with our calculator one more time. So I put 625 in my calculator, and I hit my square root button, and I get the number 25. Now, it will not give you the number negative 25, but you need to know that the solution is, or the answer is, positive or negative 25. Okay, now let's take a look at the square root of 4/9. Now, if you'll recall back when we did radicals, when we see this type of setup, the radical of a fraction or a division problem, we can rewrite that as the radical of the numerator divided by the radical of the denominator. Well, the square root of 4 is 2, and the square root of 9 is 3, so this would either be positive or negative 2/3. Okay? So let's move on down and get into our lesson today on solving quadratics using square roots. Okay? And the way we're going to do that is we're going to take the square root of both sides of the equation. But before we do that, we want to isolate the squared part of the expression first. Then we're going to take the square root, and then if necessary, we may have to solve for x afterwards. We'll get into that in a second. So let's take a look at this first example here. X squared equals 16. Well, I notice that the squared term is already isolated, so I simply need to take the square root of both sides. When I do that, I can see that x equals 4, and of course I know that my solution set needs to include negative 4. So here my solution set would be negative 4 or 4, or if we use our new symbol, we would actually write it as plus or minus 4. Okay? For the your turn problem, we're going to do the same thing. Take the square root of both sides. When I do that, I'm going to get x equals 3. Okay? But I need to remember that my solution set is going to include the positive and the negative solution, so it will be positive or negative 3. All right? Now, the next example I see is not solved for x squared. So I need to do that first. So here I'm going to add x 169 to both sides. And when I do that, I end up with x squared equals 169. Next, I'll take the square root of both sides. And that's going to give me x equals plus or minus, I believe this is 13, but I'm going to check it real quick. 169 square root, it is in fact 13. So plus or minus 13. So if I use my curly braces, now notice there's two solutions here. Okay, I'd like for you guys to pause the video and do the your turn problem, and then we'll move on. Okay guys, go ahead and take a look. How did you do? I ended up with the solution of positive 12 or negative 12. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to this next example. So let's see here. Let's subtract 25 from both sides. So that's going to give me x squared equals negative 25. And then like the last one, we will take the square root of both sides. Here I can see that x is, well, let me check this. This is a little weird here. How do I multiply the same number by itself and get a negative number? Let's see, 25 negative square root. Ooh, what does that mean? Well, when we investigate this, we can't multiply a number by itself and get a negative number, because we know that a negative times a negative is a positive, and a positive times a positive is a positive. So we actually need a new definition here. And the new definition is I, the letter I, which stands for an imaginary number, I represents the square root of negative 1. So now let's take a look at this. The square root of negative 25 is actually the square root of 25 times the square root of negative 1. So I can take the square root of 25 times the square root of negative 1, but we just got a definition of the square root of negative 1 actually equals I. So this would be 5I, and I represents an imaginary number. And yes, those are a thing. So we need to learn this. 5I. Okay? All right, I want you to pause the video and try the your turn. All right, guys, we'll go ahead and take a look at what we have here. Square root of 81, negative 81 would be 9I, and don't forget it is the positive or the negative. Over here, I forgot my plus or minus sign, so let me add that in here. So this should have been plus or minus 5I. Okay? All right, let's take a look at one where we have 3x squared minus 75. Okay, so I want to isolate the squared term. So let me add 75 to both sides. That's going to give me 3x squared equals 75. Okay. And then I'm going to divide by 3, trying to isolate this x squared. And that's going to give me x squared equals 75 divided by 3 is 25. And then the last step, the inverse of squaring a number is to take the square root, so I'm going to take the square root. So x equals plus or minus 5. Okay? All right, guys, go ahead and pause the video and try the your turn. Okay, guys, I'm going to pick up here instead of completing the thing and leaving it for you, because I wanted to review that when we have 1/2 x squared, the inverse of multiplying by 1/2 is to multiply by 2 over 1 on both sides to get rid of that fraction. So that's going to cancel out our fraction here. And that's going to give us x squared equals 2 times 50, which is going to be 100. And then the last step, of course, is to take the square root of both sides. And that's going to give me x equals plus or minus 10. Okay? All right, let's take a look at these last two problems. They're a bit different than what we've seen before, but still I notice I've got a squared term on the left and a number on the right. Okay, so I'm just going to take the square root of both sides. to undo this square right here. When I do that, they're actually going to cancel each other out. I'm going to be left with x minus 3 on the left-hand side, and I'm going to have a positive or negative 6 on the right-hand side. But wait a minute, I need to solve this for x. So I'm going to need to write both of these down. So I'm going to have x minus 3 equals negative 6, or x minus 3 equals positive 6. Okay? And then we'll finish solving these two one-step equations by adding 3 to both sides. And so when I do that, I end up with x equals negative 3 for one solution. Then I'm going to add 3 to both sides over here. And I find out that my second solution is x equals 9. And so that's going to give me the solution set of negative 3, comma, 9. Okay, now does that work? Let's see, negative 3 minus 3, negative 3 minus 3 squared would actually be negative 6 squared, which is in fact 36. And if we check our second solution, 9 minus 3 squared is 9 minus 3 is 6 squared, and that also equals 36. So we see that both of these numbers actually make this true. Okay, I'd like for you to pause the video and try the last your turn. Pick it back up and see how you did. Okay, guys, so go ahead and take a look at how I solved this problem and see how you did. So again, I took the square root of both sides, and then to solve each, I had to set x minus 12 equal to negative 3.87 and x minus 12 equal to 3.87. I added 12 to both sides and ended up with these two solutions. Guys, I hope this was helpful. Again, as you see fit, go ahead and hit the subscribe button and the thumbs up, and you'll be notified when I put out new videos.